This is Musings of the Shibe podcast. I'm your host, Hiroja Shibe.
Hello, this is Hiroja Shibe with another episode of Musings of the Shibe podcast.
Episode 150. I like to teach the world to sing. Consensus. Part 5 of our mini-series about All The Downsize as our continuation of the Bitcoin block size debate goes on.
We're going to talk about the downside of the consensus mechanism within the Bitcoin protocol or the Bitcoin space, if you will. Again, this is just another part of All The Downsize. This is part 4 of that series, which is part of the overall series of the Bitcoin's block size debate, in which we kind of break down what's going on in the various parts. So since we know what all the different parts are, we're going to talk about some of the downsides, if you will, of what is happening. We discuss the downsides of bigger blocks. We discuss why Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin XT, and Bitcoin Unlimited didn't get consensus, and part of that has to do with their bigger block proposal, as well as being outside of the Bitcoin Core development. The fact that their proposal comes out of that, and in that episode we broke that down. Then we broke down about SegWit, SegWit in itself, the downsides of SegWit, the two different main proposals, which is SegWit 2x and user activated soft fork. Now we are going to talk about consensus and break that down. The next episode will be about this new thing that popped up, which is BIP91, which we'll get into in depth as one of the SegWit proposals. It too has a lower threshold of 80% consensus to get activated. And this Bitcoin ABC, which has to do with Bitmain, we'll kind of get into that. Some of it's going to be very conspiratorial, kind of tinfoily. There is some smoke to that fire, if you will, but we'll break that down when we discuss that. And hopefully, if nothing new pops up, nothing catastrophic, if you will, or no kinks in what's going on with this debate, we will wrap things up. We'll talk about Doomsday, the hard fork scenario, kind of recap everything that's going on, and then just my overall thoughts about this whole Bitcoin block size debate and the future of Bitcoin. But before we get into the downsides of consensus on this episode, the news. Okay, this is from CoinIdI. The first Swiss bank to allow its clients to exchange and hold Bitcoin by Nina Lone. Swiss private bank with 50 years of expertise in wealth management, Falcon Group, has become the first local bank to offer a new feature of blockchain asset management, including Bitcoin to its clients. Now, Switzerland became more crypto-friendly. A new service has become available to the Falcon Group in cooperation with Bitcoin Suzy AG, a regulated crypto financial broker based in Switzerland. The bank has already received approval from FINMA, which is the Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority, to launch this unique product. And according to a report, clients can exchange and hold Bitcoins via Falcon using their cash holdings. Moreover, Falcon Bank has installed a Bitcoin ATM in the lobby of the bank's headquarters in Zurich, which is accessible to the public during business hours. Arthur Vallone, the global head of product and services, Falcon Private Limited, commented that the following are strategic partnership with Move Digital, a best-in-class provider of digital asset management and investment advisory system. This is the further tangible element of our new strategy. We are proud to be the first movers in the Swiss private banking area to provide blockchain asset management for our clients. Falcon convinced that the time is right to enter this nascent market. Companies have already, if you will, headquartered themselves in Switzerland because it has been favorable as far as regulations go. But this is the first, I guess you can say, major step forward in that cryptocurrency space for that country, but overall in general for our cryptocurrency to have the Swiss backing. Everything checked out as the Bitcoin eventually settles its little spat it's having with itself and the increases back up again to either 3,000 or past. Many are estimating that eventually by the end of the year it's going to be $5,000 a coin. But we'll see. And that is it for the news. Now we're going to talk about some of the downsides of consensus. So the human factor. I'm going to read a little bit that kind of addresses or at least sums up a little bit about the tension within the Bitcoin space, or the Bitcoin block size debate, if you will. So this what appeared on Medium through the keepings.net. It was written by Chris Hammerschmidt, The Human Factor and Consensus on the Blockchain System. This is published in March of this year. So distributed consensus finding between untrusted nodes is a key ingredient in the blockchain system. Whether mining proof of work or minting proof of stake algorithms are used, the consensus established algorithmically guarantees a consistent view of the data stored in the blockchain, e.g. who owns which bitcoins in the Bitcoin blockchain. Consistent algorithms itself are not necessarily new, but their unique setting and the way they contribute to the blockchain systems is where a technical novelty when a Bitcoin arrived. But beyond this technical layer of consensus, there are more layers of consensus directly involving humans, and we don't have a good technical solution in place for these layers. This is proven to be a problem and is currently leading Bitcoin to a brink of chaos in the debate about block size. Let's take a look at the different layers before we return to the case of Bitcoin's current turmoil. After all, the situation is not unique to Bitcoin, but as the largest, most mature system in the community, it seems natural that the Bitcoin community encounters the problem first. I will distinguish three concerns of consensus. 1, consensus on the data. 2, consensus on the use and the usefulness of data. And 3, consensus on the communication of data. So item 1, the consensus on the data is dealt with by consensus finding algorithm, which is the answer to what data is included in the blockchain, answered by miners or stakeholders in the distributed network. Item 2, the use and usefulness of data is answered the question along the lines of what is the data valuable and why do we store it? In the case of Bitcoin, it is a function of Bitcoin as a currency, i.e. as a way to conduct transaction, or a way to store value, and that's where we're getting some problems. Without some consensus on the value of Bitcoin, the distributed ledger of Bitcoin does not make sense. The answer to this question is often taken over by supply/demand differential markets, but can also take a very different forms. In Ethereum, it is not the value of the units of currency, but the value of the automated contract execution that drives the value of the network. So right now, Bitcoin has a crisis of what is it? As we talked about in the way of Satoshi, is it a storage value or is it cash? Item 3, the consensus of communication data is very crucial. Every blockchain system specifies a distributed network that needs to communicate and execute a shared algorithm. To do so, it needs to speak the same language, i.e. broadcast and receive messages between the network participants, and needs to agree on the same data format. It ranges from very trivial formatting to issues. Imagine someone storing data in the date, month, year format, and then someone else is month, date, year format, to fundamental questions like what messages are valid, what messages need to be broadcast, and what makes data on the blockchain valid, and how to identify illegitimate data on the blockchain, i.e. double spending attempts in Bitcoin. The answer to these questions is typically hard-coded in the source code of the software. The answers were predefined by the developers in their implementation. This gives the developers a very central and important role in most blockchain systems. Yet many implementations are open source. Everyone can make changes and run their own chained version. But without other nodes accepting, acknowledging, and respecting the modifications, the new implementation will not have any effect. If it changes the data format on the blockchain, all participants running the original software will discard the data. If it changes the network communication format, other nodes might misunderstand or flat out disregard messages from the modified client. It comes down to the spread of the modified software. If the majority of the participants adopt the new software, it will prevail and determine the data on the blockchain, as well as the communication protocol involved in determining the data. This process will lead to a fork. The blockchain will split into 2 chains, and each chain only valid on the software used to create it. For Bitcoin, it will lead to 2 parallel currencies, and if you receive coins on each chain, if you receive coins on one chain, they will be valid on one chain, but not the other chain. How does this relate to the Bitcoin's problem? Bitcoin's block records, transactions between users, i.e. transfer coins. Transactions are grouped. We kind of already knew this. Okay, so the more popular Bitcoin gets and the more transactions it handles, the more data needs to be appended to the blockchain. Just now, Bitcoin is at its capacity limit. It barely manages to include all public transactions and executes them. Soon, the amount of transactions might be too large to fit into the blocks, will lead to a backlog of non-executed Bitcoin transactions. There are multiple competing protocols to solve this problem. The 2 most famous one are called Segregated Witness and Bitcoin Unlimited. That's probably has since changed. We now have Segregated witness 2x. But how to decide which solution to use? Developers of Bitcoin vow to remain neutral and not to modify the core protocol on their own. The decision is delegated to the miners. With each block they mine, they can also signal which proposal they prefer. If the version gets a significant majority, the problem is solved, but if not, the Bitcoin blockchain might fork in separate, non-compatible versions of Bitcoin. But in proof-of-work protocol, the miners are not necessarily the stakeholders and users of the blockchain. At the moment, Bitcoin Unlimited is favored by many miner pools representing a significant amount of mining power, but many Bitcoin users prefer a SegWit solution. So what's the takeaway of a blockchain system in general? Once deployed, a blockchain system needs to keep evolving, whether in the cases of rare unforeseen situations or for regular feature updates. Despite the decentralized nature of blockchain, the need to speak a shared language, i.e. use the same communication protocol in the distributed network, leads to a central point. Having provisions to handle consensus finding and prevent fighting between users, miners, stakeholders, and other parties is vital to maintaining trust in the blockchain. So whether the best or correct solution is to introduce a central authority, a distributed voting protocol, I believe that's what Dash does, and deferring the answer to those questions to the majority choice by miners and users is up in the air. There's probably not a single correct answer, just like politics. So how do we handle the human factor? And his second point here is pretty much the use and usefulness of data in the answer. I think is why we are having such a contentious issue right now. You know, what is Bitcoin? And I don't think even with SegWit 2x or the user-activated soft fork happening, that is going to solve the problem. Because all it is kicking it down the line, if you will. The answer needs to be solved. What is Bitcoin? And once that is established, is it a settlement layer or is it digital cash? If it's kind of in essence definitively answered, then you're going to see the economic answer. If people are fine with that, then you're going to see people continue forward. If they're not, you might see a fork or monetary value being put in other chains. So Bitcoin consensus is the governing principle that allows for Bitcoin to function. Everyone kind of knows the rules. There's a set parameters to change the rules. If you don't particularly like the consensus or the shape of the protocol in and of itself, like for example, you don't want to deal with a coin that has only a 21 million cap, you may want to create something like Litecoin or Dogecoin, which has a much higher cap than 21 million. Or you don't like something like proof of work, the mechanism that allows for the blockchain to exist, the mathematical principle allowing for proof of work for the blockchain to exist. Maybe you want proof of stake. And so these rules, these consensus rules, if you will, these underlying principles of Bitcoin have allowed it to come to existence, is allowed it to function, these are rules that everyone kind of knows. They're hard, fast rules. These are rules that cannot necessarily be broken, because if you break it, you're breaking consensus, you get forks. The things that you want to do on the blockchain are not going to happen. You're not going to have these double spends. You're not going to have more than 21 million Bitcoin. Also to, in essence, perhaps change consensus or make some changes to the protocol or the nature of Bitcoin itself. For example, SegWit, you have to use these mechanisms, either soft fork or hard fork, to make these changes. And with these changes, you have to have the hashing power. With BIP91 and BIP148 and the Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Unlimited, they sought to change the hard rule consensus of being changing the rule, if you will, to something a lower threshold, either 75% or 80% of the hashing mining power to get a rule change, if you will. Versus 95%, which is the BIP9 rule, where if you have 95% of the hashing power, then things can change. At the same time, you still have the 51% hashing power to back things up as well when it comes to Bitcoin, where if you have 51% of the hashing power, you can do things or try or make an attempt to break the rule, but thus far no one's been successful in doing that, except for a couple of hiccups within the Bitcoin space when they had to hard fork because there was a problem with the code. But that was one instance, and in general, in the past almost 9 years, no one's done a 51% hashing power attack on the Bitcoin protocol, and the changes to the Bitcoin protocol in itself have followed these rules of consensus. And this is the problem. Some people believe the threshold is too high, the changes are too high, and overall the governance of Bitcoin is failing. Just look at the way things have gotten very contentious within the Bitcoin space in general. Now, there are those that believe that it just demonstrates that consensus is functioning, that Bitcoin is functioning, that it's supposed to be difficult, it's supposed to be hard. But this episode is just talking about some of the negatives that people think or associate with consensus in general. How that it's not necessary. While Satoshi Nakamoto may have created Bitcoin to be Byzantine fault tolerant, there's still this human factor associated with Bitcoin and consensus that you can't mathematically factor out. No matter how hard you try, it might not be possible to do so. But before we get into that just particularly, I just want to read an article about the blockchain immutability myth. This is from Gideon Greenspan. This is a key component about the majority of cryptocurrencies except for Ethereum, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Doomsday. That it's very important to understand. It's one of the attributes of the Bitcoin protocol that people like. So Dr. Gideon Greenspan is the founder and the CEO of CoinScience, the company behind the multi-chain platform for private blockchains. In this opinion piece, Greenspan attacks the idea that the true immutability can be achieved in a blockchain system and argued a more relative definition of this feature better encapsulates what the technology can achieve. This is from CoinDesk. This was published this year in May. So here's a quote here. The highest good than which there is no higher is the blockchain, and consequently is an immutable good, hence truly eternal and truly immortal. St. Augustine de Nata Bloin 405 CE with some minor edits. If you ask someone well informed about the characteristics of blockchains, the word immutable would invariably appear in the response. In plain English, this word is used to denote something which can never be modified or changed. In a blockchain, it refers to the global log of transactions, which are created by the consensus between the chain's participants. The basic notion is that once a blockchain transaction has received a sufficient level of validation, some cryptography ensures it can never be replaced or revised. This marks the blockchain is different from regular files or database, in which information can be edited and deleted at will, or so the theory goes. In the rankest area of the blockchain debate, immutability has become a quasi-religious doctrine, a core belief that must not be shaken or questioned. And just like the doctrines in mainstream religions, members of the opposing camps use immutability as a weapon of desire, of derision and ridicule. The past year has witnessed two prominent examples. For one, cryptocurrency advocates claim that immutability can only be achieved through decentralized economic mechanisms such as proof of work. From this perspective, private blockchains are laughable because they depend on the collective good behavior of a known group of validators who clearly cannot be trusted. We'll talk about proof of stake when we talk about Bitcoin ABC and BIP91 when we get in depth, because there are people out there that seek to possibly switch to proof of stake and this is coming from the Bitcoin core, if the SegWit upgrade doesn't go according to plan, if you will. SCORE had also been directed at the idea of the edible or mutable blockchain, in which retroactive modifications can be made to transaction histories under certain conditions. Mockers posed the question, what could possibly be the point of the blockchain if its contents can be easily changed? And this was the question that was posed during the Ethereum breakage, if you will, when the DAO was reversed, and trying to prevent the hacker from taking all these different funds. And that's where you got the chain split and you have Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And Ethereum Classic is still viable a year later. It's still trading. People are still building off of it, and it's building actually significant momentum. And what they did is they acknowledged the hack, that it was code, the code is law, and that you couldn't reverse the DAO, if you will. And for those on the sidelines, it's fun to watch the mudslinging, not least because both of these criticisms are plain wrong, but stem from the fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of immutability in blockchains, and indeed any computer system. For those short on time, here's the bottom line. In blockchains, there's no such thing as perfect immutability. The real question is, what are the conditions under which a particular blockchain can and cannot be changed? And do those conditions match the problem we're trying to solve? To put it another way, a blockchain's transactions are not written into the mind of God, with apologies to Augustine above. Instead, the chain's behavior depends on a network of corporal computer systems, which will always be vulnerable to destruction or corruption. But before we get into the details of how, let's proceed by recapping some basics of the blockchains themselves. Kind of already know this, so mutability in blockchains. Let's return to two examples cited in the introduction, in which the doctrine of mutability has been used as a basis of ridicule. We will begin with the claim that the consensual validation procedures used in permission blockchains cannot bring about the true immutability promised by public chains. The criticism is mostly addressed by pointing to the vulnerability of public blockchains themselves. Take, for example, the Ethereum blockchain, which suffered a devastating exploit in June 2016. Some found a coding loophole in a smart contract called the DAO, which almost $250 million had been invested and began draining its funds at speed. While this clearly violated the intentions of the contract's creators and investors, its terms and conditions relied on the mantra that the code is law. Not less than a month later, the Ethereum software was updated to prevent the hacker from withdrawing the cryptocurrency earned. Of course, this update would not be enforced since every Ethereum user controlling their own computer. Nonetheless, it was publicly supported by Bounte, the Ethereum's creator, as well as many other community leaders. As a result, most users complied, and the blockchain with the new rules kept the same Ethereum. A minority disagreed with the chain and continued the blockchain according to the original rules, earning the title Ethereum Classic. A more accurate choice of names might be Ethereum Compromise or Ethereum the Pure. Either way, democracy is democracy, and the pragmatic and popular Ethereum is now worth over 10 times the idealistic but sidelined Ethereum Classic. Now let's consider a less benevolent way in which the public blockchain immutability can be undermined. Recall that the blockchain creation or mining in Bitcoin and Ethereum used a proof-of-work scheme in which a mathematical problem must be solved in order to generate a block and claim its reward. The value of this reward eventually turns mining into an arms race, with miners competing to solve the problem faster. To compensate, the network probability adjusts the difficulty and maintain a constant rate of block creation, once every 10 minutes in Bitcoin or 15 seconds in Ethereum. In the last 5 years, Bitcoin difficulty has increased by a factor of 350,000 times. Today, the vast majority of Bitcoin mining takes place on expensive, specialized hardware in locations where the weather is cold and electricity is cheap. For example, a $1,089 will buy you an I'dI S9, which mines blocks 10 times faster than any desktop computer and burns 10 times more electricity. This is all a long way from the democratic ideas with which Bitcoin was created, even if it does make the blockchain extremely secure. Well, kind of secure. If someone wanted to undermine the immutability of the Bitcoin blockchain, here's how they would do it. First, they would install more mining capacity than the rest of the network put together and created a so-called 51% attack. Second, instead of openly participating in the mining process, they would mine their own secret branch, contain whatever transactions they approved and censor the rest. Finally, when the desired amount of time had passed, they would anonymously broadcast their secret branch to the network. Since the attacker has more mining power than the rest of the network, their branch will contain more proof of work than the public one. Every Bitcoin node would therefore switch over, since the rules of Bitcoin state the more difficult branch wins. And previously confirmed transactions not in the secret branch will be reversed, and the Bitcoin they spent will be sent elsewhere. But now, most Bitcoin believers will be laughing because I wrote install more mining capacity than the rest of the network put together, as if this is trivial to achieve. And they have a point, because of course it's not easy. Lots of people already have done it, yet needed a lot of mining equipment and a lot of electricity to power, both of which cost a ton of money. But here's the inconvenient fact that most Bitcoiners brush over. For the government of any mid-sized country, the money required is still small change. So let's estimate the cost of a 51% attack, which reverses a year of Bitcoin transaction. At the current Bitcoin price of $1,500, and a reward of 15 Bitcoins, including transaction fees per 10-minute block, miners earn around $1.2 billion per year, or 1,500 times 15 times 6 times 24 times 365. Assuming reasonably that they're not losing money overall, or at least not losing much, that means the total miner expense would always be at the same range. I'm simplifying here, but analyze the one-time cost of purchasing mining equipment, but $400 million will buy you enough Antminer and nines to match the current Bitcoin network mining capacity. So we're in the right ballpark. This was published this year? Alright, well, he has the wrong mining reward, but okay. Since the attacker has more mining power than the rest of the network, this branch will contain more proof of work than the public one. Every Bitcoin node would therefore switch over, and since the rules of Bitcoin states that the more difficult branch wins in previously confirmed transactions on the secret branch will reverse the Bitcoin that will be spent and sent elsewhere. Alright, I already read that part, so here we go. Now think about the reports that Bitcoin is being used by Chinese citizens to circumvent their country's capital controls. And consider further that the Chinese government tax revenues are approximately $3 trillion per year. Would a non-democratic country's government spend 0.04% of its budget to shut down a popular method for illegally taking money out of the country? I wouldn't claim that the answer is necessarily yes, but if you think the answer is definitely no, you're being more than a little naive, especially considering that China's reportedly employs 2 million people to police internet content, which totals $10 billion a year. If we assume a low wage of $5,000, that puts a $1.2 billion cost of reversing a year of Bitcoin transactions in perspective. Even the analysts understand the problem because the Chinese government could undermine the Bitcoin network much more easily and cheaply. It appears that the majority of Bitcoin mining takes place in China due to the low cost of hydroelectric power and other factors. And given a few tanks and platoons, China's army could physically seize these Bitcoin mining operations and repurchase them to censor or reverse transactions. While the wider Bitcoin world would be undoubtedly noticed, there's nothing they could do without fundamentally altering the governance structure and therefore nature of Bitcoin itself. What was that about censorship-free money? None of this should be construed as a criticism of Bitcoin's design or a prediction that the network's catastrophe will actually happen. The Bitcoin blockchain is a remarkable piece of engineering, perhaps even perfect for the purpose its creator had in mind. And if I had to put money on it, I would bet that China and other governments probably wouldn't attack Bitcoin this way because it's not in their ultimate interest to do so. More likely, they'll focus their wrath on its more untraceable cousins like Dash, Zerocash, and Monero. Nonetheless, the mere possibility of this form of interference puts the cryptocurrency's immutability doctrine in its place. The Bitcoin blockchain and its ilk are not immutable in any perfect or absolute sense. Rather, they are immutable so long as nobody big enough and rich enough decides to destroy them. Still, by relying on the economic costs of subverting the network, cryptocurrency's immutability satisfies specific needs of people who don't want to trust governments and companies and banks. It may not be perfect, but it's the best they can do. Then he goes and talks about rewritable private chains. It's not really important to this discussion. The whole point of me bringing this up is that there is a possibility of, in essence, breaking the chain if you put enough capital into a 51% hashing power attack, which is something right now only a series of powerful, wealthy people could do, or a government institution. And because the nodes and the coding is such that whatever the longest chain is, everyone switches over kind of automatically, then you're going to have these problems.
Down through the software, if you will. The current status of Bitcoin with the blockchain immutability.
So with the human factor at this point, when it comes to consensus, not, I guess you can say, being factored out, the fact that right at this moment, Bitcoin doesn't know what it really wants to be. Is it a settlement layer? Is it a digital cash? I think that's really what the debate over the block size is about. And while according to the news, SegWit 2x might be something that might be activated, or user activated software could be something that could be activated on August 1st. This in and itself doesn't really fundamentally solve the issue of what is Bitcoin. Is it a settlement layer? Is it digital cash? And if SegWit 2x, gains traction, is that 2x, that raising the block size limit, is that hard fork, is that where the rubber is going to meet the road, if you will, and we find out whether or not people want Bitcoin to be a settlement layer or they want it to be digital cash. And I think that's where people have issues with consensus, because with Bitcoin Unlimited, even SegWit 2x, Bitcoin Classic, and Bitcoin XT, these proposals that came out, and even to some extent the Bitcoin dynamic proposal and emerging consensus that Bitcoin Unlimited had. It had to deal with the fact that they wanted to lower the threshold for consensus to activate, either a hard fork or soft fork changes to the protocol lower than 95%. And with that lowering, whether it be 75%, 80%, or even lower than that, it changes certain things. It gets things added, I guess, progressing further. But do we want to add things so quickly or such a low threshold? Because it's still at 75% or 80%, there's a chance that 20% of the network could fork off. whether it be during the soft fork or a hard fork. And what will that do to the overall protocol or network? Will we eventually end up having multiple versions of Bitcoin? And with that, this is where people get, is consensus the way that Bitcoin is set up, because it's Byzantine, fault tolerant, and the proof of work, is that a method for a monetary system? Is the threshold too high? Are we making too much of security and not enough about convenience or utility, if you will? Do we really need a decentralized system? Should we have a decentralized system? Should we have a centralized authority at some point? And this is where, we get the kind of downsides. And again, I think it really boils down to, when it comes to people seeing the downsides to some of the issues with the Bitcoin consensus, is what is Bitcoin? And what it is really like how you view it is the level of consistency you want it to be. If you view it as a settlement layer, maybe you want something easier. If you view it as a digital cash, then you want something hard. You don't want changes to occur so rapidly that it changes the very nature of Bitcoin itself. So that's it for this episode of The Downsize of Bitcoin. Our next episode is going to deal with Bitcoin ABC, BIP91, and proof of stake. These three other things that people have just kind of thrown in the mix as a way of maybe challenging the possibility of a hard fork. And we'll talk about those things. And then we'll talk about hard fork in our Doomsday episode, if there is a hard fork. And eventually there will be a hard fork when a 2 megabyte limit is done. Whenever the block size is raised, it has to be done by a hard fork. And then we'll just wrap everything up. But thank you very much for listening, and to the moon. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review either through iTunes or Stitchers or any of the podcasting apps that you're currently using to listen to this show. Thank you, and until next time. This has been a Hiroshi Shine Space Odyssey Network production.